Greetings folks, my name is Bob and I review laptops. And most of you already know that. If you're new, well now you know. But one thing for sure that most of you do not know is that I do not own a desktop. I live the laptop life. That means everything that I do, from editing to just, gaming, everything that I need a computer for, I do on a laptop. That laptop, for the most part, over the last 15 months has been this AERO 15. It's got the 8750H and the 2070 Max-Q. This has been a great laptop and has suited me very well. Well, over the last month, maybe a little bit more, I've been using the newer chassis design, and this particular model here has the OLED display, which is fantastic, and it has a 9750H, which is essentially the same thing as the 8750H, and it also has the RTX 2070 Max-Q. And after using the classic style for the last 15 months and then getting into the newer version over the last month and a half or so, it's been very fun and a little interesting for me, especially now that I have gone back to the original AERO as my daily driver, as eventually Gigabyte will be requesting this model back. But I happened to go back to this again for a second time, and a few things just struck me as odd, and there's actually a lot more differences between these two, and I want to share them with you today. So the first thing is the port placement. Now the port selection in and of itself is essentially identical, but the fact that the placement of the ports has been pulled forward towards the front of the chassis to accommodate the better thermal solution on the newer design, well, that's just something that you may have to get used to. Now, a quick personal opinion for me. Everybody has their own preference on port placement and the ports themselves. And for me, since I am very mobile and I'm constantly plugging in external drives, various SD cards, I actually prefer all of my ports to be on the sides of the laptop, and I would like the exhaust and everything to be pushed out the back. So neither one of these quite do that, but as far as most of the laptops that I review, the AERO line of laptops has done that best for me. Now, I know a lot of you will enjoy having a lot of the ports on the back. That is a pain in the butt for me because several times throughout the day, I'm constantly having to unplug something and plug something back in, and if I need to look over the lid and feel out what's back there, it's not the end of the world, but again, it's just a personal preference for me. By no means would I ever dock points or give a laptop a poor review due to the port location for the most part, unless they start sticking the heavy, thicker port cables management-wise on the right-hand side. That's a no-no. Both of these laptops suit me from not only just the port selection, but the port placement, and that's something that I particularly enjoy. Now, there's no Windows Hello on this older design. We do have a fingerprint reader on this newer chassis, and it's very responsive, as you could probably see right there. However, when you're using this in a poorly lit room, or maybe just no lighting at all, and you're relying on the lit display and keyboard, you cannot see that fingerprint reader. And more times than not, I've had to take a flashlight or my cell phone to sort of light that area so I could use the fingerprint reader. Been sort of awkward, and I kind of wish that it was more like this here, how you can see that the power button is lit up on this, and then they just put the fingerprint reader embedded into the power button. I've seen some Dell laptops do this in the past several years ago, and I think that might make for a better solution. Am I nitpicking here? Well, yes, clearly. In fact, this whole video is probably more about nitpicking than anything, but I'm just pointing out some of the flaws and little minor hiccups between the two that I really noticed once I started switching back and forth between the two. So I do like that we have Windows Hello here, and I think that's great. A lot of people like the infrared camera for that, but on here, both webcams are at the bottom. This one, the newer model, does feature a shutter. So for you privacy pros out there, this is awesome. And moving forward, if I were to be in the market for a laptop, I think I would look for something with a webcam shutter. Granted, I have nothing to hide, but I really appreciate that it's here now that I have been using one for, again, the last month and a half or so. Now, the keyboard itself, both of them are pretty close aesthetically, but there's just something about the newer one that feels a little bit springier, and then it bottoms out a little bit easier. I actually like the tactile feel of the old model a little bit better, but this could be a little bit of biasness just due to the fact that I have been using this for well over a year now, but I do prefer the older keyboard. Now when it comes to the function keys, they are lit up on the older model, and on the newer Gigabyte AERO 15 and 17, even the 10th gen one, it's my understanding is those keys are still not lit up yet. So that is kind of a bummer. But one thing that's not a bummer about this new system is the fact that you can actually use it with the lid closed. Now the exhaust on the older model comes out here at the hinge, so when you close it, it suffocates the machine, and there's no way to expel that heat from the back of the chassis since there's no ventilation here in order to do so. Now the aesthetics of the older model no doubt are a little bit cleaner, maybe a little bit more business oriented, but these are very powerful laptops that do feature excellent ports, and some people may want to use this as a docking station with a larger display. Oftentimes when you do that, you just close the lid. Obviously you set the operating system to work with the lid closed, you hook up all your peripherals and your monitor, and you go to town. You can't do this on the older model, and you most definitely can on the new one, and I think that's great. And because of that alone, I would absolutely find just the chassis design on this maybe a little bit more aggressive, sure, but I could easily overlook that just because of that feature alone. And I knew a lot of people in real life that had a hard pass on this older design because of that, because so many people, again, that I know in real life live the laptop life, but when they take it home, they want to hook it up to their external monitor and keyboard. So this laptop definitely favors that solution. But there's more to it than just that alone. Gigabyte really tuned and dialed in the hinge. Now a lot of people like the hinge on this older model because it takes up about 95% of the bottom here, which means rigidity, sturdiness, longevity, right? It just screams that. In 15 months, and this laptop has been all over the place, several places in the country, thousands and thousands of miles, it has held up remarkably well. In fact, it feels and looks still brand new to me. And I think the hinge design on that definitely lends a hand to the overall, sturdiness and reliability on that as far as long-term goes. But because of the design, it doesn't, what am I trying to say here? It doesn't quite feel as slick as this one here. Like this one, when it closes, it kind of just feels the same through this whole range of motion, something I never really noticed before. I'm going to get to my point here in a second. And when you hold it from the bottom, this will tend to open and kind of flop around a little bit. Now, I'm so used to holding these laptops, I will hold them this way when I carry it around, and it's not a big deal. But because there's no exhaust on the back of the classic design, it feels very natural to also carry it this way. And when you do, this may not close too slick-like. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's just a bit of a nuisance here. Whereas the newer design, it almost has like this cam inside of these hinges where you get it to a certain point and it just has this satisfying close to it. It's not magnetized like I've seen on some of the Asus Zephyrus models, the really high-end ones, but now when I hold it this way, it doesn't flop around. Now again, I'm so used to taking AERO laptops and holding them this way, or in this case, since the exhaust is on the back, I'm probably more apt to hold it from the front anyway, but again, that's just me. This could annoy you on something like this, whereas this one just feels so much more sturdy. So quite interesting there. When it comes to battery life on these two machines with that 94 watt-hour battery, 5 to 7 hours on this very consistently. If you just want to let it sit there and idle or turn down the brightness and RGB keyboard and just watch movies, you can easily get that 8 to 10 hours out of it, but that's probably a pretty rare situation. So 5 to 7 hours on here, no problem. That 4K OLED display definitely drinks up the battery juice quite a bit, and maybe this being lit up all the time could help contribute to that as well. When I set it to 1080p, I was able to get an extra 40 to 60 minutes out of it. That's really squeezing the life out of it, but generally speaking, whatever I was able to get out of here was typically about 1 hour better than I was able to get out of the newer design featuring the OLED display. And that was typically maybe a best case scenario if I'm being honest. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting when it comes to the overall gaming performance between the two. Because of the better thermal solution on the newer laptop, expect to get a GPU that just does not thermal throttle. As a matter of fact, when both of these created equal running at their best, and this laptop here has Fuji poly thermal pads and really nice non-conductive thermal interface material that I had just put on about a month ago. The temperatures here hit near thermal throttling, and if you were to buy one of these laptops today, expect to require new thermal paste, as this has probably been sitting in a warehouse somewhere for a long period of time and the paste is all dried up and gone. On these newer models, they use Hydronaut. Really nice paste, apparently better for longevity, or so I am told, and the thermal solution here is just a little bit beefier, and the fans move a lot more air, and as a result, this GPU tends to be about 15 degrees cooler than this one on its best day. And I really appreciate that. However, when it comes to the CPU, the thermal throttle set point on these Gigabyte laptops, and pretty much all Gigabyte laptops that I have reviewed over the last 2 years, is set to 90 degrees Celsius. And just expect that to happen. No matter what I do, unless I do some super advanced tuning, stuff that most people don't even want to do, stuff that I don't even want to do, the temperature here is likely going to hit 90 degrees Celsius. But there's a little bit more to it than that between these two chassis strictly. Now, my older model here has an 8750H, and for whatever reason, the wattage that this can pull, even with its power limits of 80 watts and 62 watts respectively, just like this one, I can always get higher wattage consistently out of this machine than I can on the newer one. Now, granted, this has the 9750H, but it just did not want to pull the same wattage that the older model did, despite them both being set up identically. I even did a fresh operating system on this and set it up how I would use it should I take ownership of this for myself. And no matter what happened, even with both of these set up identically with the same undervolt, whether it was stock or extremely undervolted, my Cinebench scores were always better on the 8750H. Not to think for a second here, folks, that the 8750H is better than the 9750H. Technically, it's not. And when it comes to Intel's case, these are some thirsty chips. As we all like to know, they like the wattage. They tend to respond very well there as long as they are thermally capable, and for whatever reason, my older model just has better CPU scores than the newer one. Same thing with Firestrike. Now, the GPU scores on the newer model were just a hair better, but I've taken this test multiple times. It seemed to be pretty close, even on the CPU side. Nonetheless, what do I think about that setup? Well, honestly, this is a lot louder laptop. The thermal solution is a little bit beefier, but at 55 decibels versus 48 decibels, that may be a bit of an ear sore to some. Thankfully, the software here is very tunable, and we can bring this down quite a bit and still keep the GPU from thermal throttling. That may sound bad to you because potentially it is louder, but for me, I would prefer this laptop just on that merit alone because it does offer the software that gives me some good tunability, and I like that I have a lot of headroom here before the GPU thermal throttles. And in most games, once that GPU starts to throttle and you don't know what you're doing as far as tuning or how to fix that, you may be a little screwed when it comes to improving performance unless you can really get in there and do some of the things that I have featured across various tutorials. When it comes to this laptop, this review unit's been all over the place, and I'm finally getting my hands on it even though this laptop's been around for probably 10 months, and it's still holding GPU thermal performance quite well. And once again, the CPU thermal performance, even with some of the best I can put on this thing minus liquid metal, it still tends to run up to that 90 degrees Celsius, which it is what it is on these laptops, right? All in all, at the end of the day, this newer Gigabyte laptop made me a little envious and a little jealous, and I would most certainly prefer it over the old one. But without having those function keys lit up, that wasn't a big deal for me because I'm very familiar with these keyboards. But if you are new to one of these laptops and you've never used anything like it, that's going to take some getting used to. When it comes to the Windows Hello, I like that, but if you are in a poor lit room, it may be a little difficult to find. Perhaps you can get used to that later on down the road, but as how it feels on the trackpad, it sort of blends in, so that may be troublesome for those down the road as well. In the grand scheme of things, these two laptops are very similar. They both scream Gigabyte AERO to me. I just think they did a little bit more to this new one that draws me to it. And with the tunability within the software to bring some of those fan acoustics down, I do appreciate that as well. And if you want to compare the two displays, well, I talk about that within my in-depth review of this laptop that I had just released April 2020. So check that out if you were interested on more comparisons and discussion, especially on this newer design. All right, folks, that's going to do it. Just some nitpicky things going back and forth. It sure is a lot of fun to sit down and use a laptop for over a year and then use the newer version of it, embrace its little quirks and all the things it does great. Go back to the old one and all of a sudden a light bulb goes off and you're like, wow, these are different but same. Mr. Miyagi. All right, folks, that's going to do it for now. I'm Bob of All Trades, and I'll see you in the next video.